America, my God. Stephen Colbert, what was your reaction to that?
I was shocked. I really was. But this is what an authoritarian government does. This is what they do. They try to silence the artists. They try to silence the truth tellers. They took all of these amazing pundits off the television, Terry Moran, Jim Acosta. And, once ABC and CBS gave in to the bribery, gave in to the blackmail that Trump threatened them with lawsuits that were bogus, and they gave him millions of dollars. As soon as that happened, they're done.
Rosie O'Donnell doesn't tiptoe into this roast. She storms in like a thundercloud over cheap carnival. Donald Trump, bloated with bravado, becomes her prime target, colliding with Rosie's scorn in a battle so uneven it's a balloon against a wrecking ball. Melania Trump isn't spared either. Once sold as elegant, she's dragged into the wreckage, revealed not as mysterious but as a stage prop in the most exhausting circus America's ever endured. Rosie makes sure the laughter cuts deepest.
Unreal. And for me, in 2006, when he was just a embarrassment in New York, nobody respected him in any way. Forbes never would put him on the richest people list because they couldn't verify his income because he was often broke. He's a con man, period. And if you grew up in New York like I did, you knew that. But he got on that show, and Mark Burnett, the producer, taught him that if you tell a lie long enough on TV, people will believe it, just how they do.
The first target is Trump's obsession with image. Rosie seizes on his endless need for validation, painting him as a man who wakes up every morning needing applause just to put his shoes on. She mocks how he parades around like a pageant contestant, except instead of answering questions about world peace, he rambles about crowd sizes, golf scores, and cable news ratings. It's a presidency reduced to a reality show rerun, with Rosie pointing out the reruns have fewer viewers than ever. She twists the knife further, calling his obsession with admiration a hollow vanity project, making him look less like a leader and more like a mall Santa auditioning for attention.
Yes.
Anyway, long story short, Trump went to sue CBS, isn't that right?
Yes, because of an interview on 60 Minutes where he didn't like the way he was edited or that Kamala Harris was edited.
So even though the legal team thought he'd win, they still paid out the $16 million, and Stephen Colbert basically said it was a bribe.
Which it was.
Yeah. And 3 days later...
Yes, because that's what he has the power now to demand that people lose their jobs, to call out private citizens like myself or like Bruce Springsteen, who spoke out very eloquently about him as well. And this is what they do. They try to silence people, and they put the fear of God in everyone that they're going to lose their job.
Then she turns to Trump's business empire, the so-called empire of golden towers and shady deals. Rosie paints those gleaming buildings not as symbols of success but as oversized monuments to debt, bankruptcy, and fragile ego. She laughs at how he insists on plastering his name everywhere, as though neon letters could hide the fact that his ventures collapse faster than a house of cards in a wind tunnel. For Rosie, the name Trump doesn't scream success, it's a warning label for bad investments and even worse judgment.
He has been a mystery to me from the moment I was conscious of him as a young child, when all his planes were getting repossessed off the runways at LaGuardia, when he was trying to sell steaks and cologne. And, because, Warren Buffett always does that, right? All the billionaires do that. No, he's the only one because he's a con man. That's the bottom line.
And he hasn't stopped. I mean, he's still flogging this, that, and the other.
In defiance of the Constitution. He's selling things from the office. He's taking money and gifts.
But Rosie doesn't stop with Trump. She zeroes in on Melania, dismantling the carefully crafted image of grace and sophistication with biting humor. She mocks the endless stiff photo ops where Melania stares into the distance like she's trapped in a bad soap opera. Rosie reminds the audience how her speeches once borrowed from Michelle Obama, making her less a first lady of originality and more a cut-and-paste project. Even her anti-bullying campaign becomes a punchline. Rosie skewers the irony of the president's wife preaching civility while married to the loudest online heckler in American politics.
Well, he is a cruel, criminal, and mentally unstable man. And Duty to Warn was a book that came out when he was first in office. Psychiatrists across the country who don't ever really diagnose people that they don't serve personally came together and made a book, Duty to Warn, to tell the world what a narcissistic, mentally ill person.
Rosie spares no detail. She points out how Melania's rare appearances look less like leadership and more like hostage videos. She dismantles the myth of mystery, painting her instead as disengaged, a figure more comfortable decorating Christmas trees than tackling any real issue. Rosie jokes that if Melania had her way, she'd replace the national anthem with elevator music just to speed through events. Back on Trump, the roast sharpens. She ridicules his Twitter habits, the late-night rants that read like a teenager locked out of prom. To Rosie, his legacy could be archived entirely in hashtags and spelling errors. She paints him less like a statesman and more like a cranky neighbor shouting at squirrels.
Oh my gosh, it has. I feel on the verge of crying when I was there, when he got elected. I luckily had a plan with my therapist. Hope she's watching. Hi, Ann. And I said to her, should he be elected, which none of us thought was going to happen, I need a plan. And the plan was always and only Ireland. My grandparents are from...
When Rosie aims at Trump's ego, she doesn't hold back. She likens his constant need for praise to a toddler demanding gold stars for coloring outside the lines. His rallies, she says, look less like political events and more like group therapy sessions where the crowd cheers to keep him from crying. Every speech is the same rambling boasts about achievements that don't exist and complaints about imaginary enemies. It's political theatre starring a lead actor who forgot his lines but won't leave the stage. Rosie dives into family dynamics too, mocking how Melania stands frozen beside him like a statue, their marriage resembling more a reluctant contract than a partnership.
You've left America.
Yes.
Because of what's been going on.
Because of him. I read Project 2025. That was pretty much the foundation of what he wanted to do. And I said, I have to get out of here. And I left before the inauguration on purpose because for 20 years, he's been using me as a punchline in all of his jokes.
I know.
And he's a very unbalanced individual. And it's very dangerous to be in his...
Rosie ridicules how Melania manages to say volumes by saying nothing, reducing her appearances to stiff silences that can't soften the chaos around her husband. Rosie laughs at the futility of trying to maintain dignity while tethered to the loudest man in America. But her roast isn't just personal, it's political. She slams Trump's record, pointing to endless controversies, a revolving door of advisors and scandals piling up faster than his denials. She mocks the way he brags about imaginary wins while chaos brews behind him. To Rosie, the so-called Trump legacy is nothing more than a parody of itself.
And I think he's the worst thing that ever happened to the United States. And his cruelty knows no bounds. And when he is upset and humiliated and embarrassed, he has no control and he goes apeshit. Can I say that? And, he is the kind of person that is a grifter. And he is an evangelical preacher to people who believe that Celebrity Apprentice was true. And Celebrity...
In Rosie's telling the world won't remember Donald Trump as a statesman, but as an unintentional court jester, footnoted not for greatness but absurdity. His reign will be remembered less for policies and more for punchlines. Late-night comedians thrived, meme creators prospered, and sketch writers built entire tours on his blunders. Rosie insists his true legacy isn't in laws but in satire. He craved monuments but instead built a comedy archive, a digital mausoleum of rants and meltdowns on repeat. As for Melania, she won't be remembered for influence but for perfecting the art of distant posing and practiced indifference.
Out there, because he had a press conference right before we were live where he had a teenager, Tara O'Connor, who was Miss Teen USA. She had kissed a girl in the village and they took a picture and put it on all the newspapers. And he made her do a press conference where she apologized. And it looked to me like a pimp and a prostitute. And I said that on the air. And then I proceeded to list facts, not hyperbole, just facts about who he was and what he did. Bankrupt all these times, money from his father, not a self-made man. Can't quantify his riches on Forbes magazine. I just said facts, and you would think that I called his mother.
Rosie emphasizes that Melania's tenure as First Lady will be remembered not for words spoken or actions taken, but for long silences, designer wardrobes, and the occasional glare that screamed she'd rather be anywhere else. She ridicules the carefully staged photos that were sold as proof of unity but looked more like ads for discomfort. In Rosie's words, Melania wasn't a partner in governance, she was a stage prop wheeled out to project normal in an administration defined by chaos. She stood in the background like a wax figure while the sideshow spilled across headlines and social feeds worldwide.
I had an interaction on television where I talked about him in 2006, and I made fun of his hair and did what comedians have been doing for years. And he went really crazy. He just could not get himself to get over it for over 20 years. And he uses me as a punching line and disparages me and insults me and calls me names like it's a kid in school and I'm being teased. But when I talked about him, he was not the president. He was a reality show host, and he was a little bit of a joke in New York, where I grew up. If you grew up in New York, you watched his planes get repossessed off the runways at LaGuardia. You watched him grift everyone with this steak business and a fake university that he got sued for. And so nobody really took him seriously in 2000.
Rosie describes it as an era where politics blurred with entertainment, where governing was sidelined by self-promotion and dignity was traded for sound bites. She strips away Trump's illusions, the dealmaker myth, the promise of greatness, the aura of authority, and exposes only a salesman hawking a product no one wanted. His promises evaporated faster than his casino fortunes. His slogans echoed hollow. His speeches turned to parody before they ended. And Melania's role? Not influence, not leadership, just absence. A performance of detachment masquerading as grace.
4 years when he was in last time, it was not a good time for me. And I have a little child who's 12 who has autism, and I have to be on top of my game. You know, I have to be mentally and emotionally there and present. And I didn't want to be distracted by him or have him play such a major role in my reality. So I said, where could I go? And this was the only choice for me. Yeah. And we've had really the most amazing welcome. It's the most beautiful place. And my daughter said, I like it better here than America.
By the end of this demolition, Rosie O'Donnell has shredded every illusion. Donald Trump stands exposed as a hollow performer whose legacy was spectacle, not substance. Melania Trump, equally unmasked, is recast as an accessory to the show, a mannequin holding her pose while the stage collapsed. Together, they form the strangest double act in political history. The tragedy, Rosie declares, isn't just the scandals or embarrassments. The real tragedy is that America had to endure the performance at all. They leave the stage not as admired leaders but as permanent fixtures of parody, remembered not for vision but vanity, not for leadership but laughter.